Sir, I think you might find that other properties better match your needs.
Is that right?
We'll arrange a full refund. No charge.
Ray picked up his notebook, walked to the door, stopped, turned back just once, and looked at the lobby. The chandelier he'd spent 3 weeks sourcing, the marble floor he'd argued for, the brass fixtures he'd approved in 2003. Then he walked out. 20 minutes later, he made one phone call.
Frank, pull every vendor contract, every HR file, every separation record, tonight.
What they didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, was that the man they'd just thrown out had poured the first concrete on this property 22 years ago. And in 32 hours, he was going to walk back through that door. This time, they would know exactly who he was. The city was still half asleep. Chicago at 6 in the morning has a particular kind of quiet. Not peaceful, just suspended, like it's holding its breath before the weight of the day comes down. Ray Callahan rode through it alone. His Harley moved slow down Michigan Avenue. No rush. He wasn't the kind of man who rushed anymore. 60 years had burned that out of him a long time ago. The boots on his feet were the same pair he'd worn for 11 years. The jacket, dark brown Carhartt, cracked at the left elbow, had been with him even longer. No logos, no shine, just leather that had earned its wear. He didn't look like a man who owned anything. That was the point. He turned off Michigan and the building came into view. The floors less than steel, rising clean against a gray October sky. The Sterling Pinnacle, Chicago's crown jewel of luxury hospitality, according to every travel magazine that had ever written about it. According to Ray, it was just a building he'd poured the first concrete on in the spring of 2003. He pulled the Harley to the far end of the block, cut the engine, sat. He didn't go in. Not yet. There's something a man learns after 40 years in construction and hospitality. You can tell when a structure is in trouble before you ever set foot inside. It's not one thing. It's 100 small things that don't announce themselves. A slight lean in the foundation. A crack running where there shouldn't be cracks. The way water pools wrong after a rain. Buildings talk. Most people just don't know the language. Ray sat on his bike and read the language of the Sterling Pinnacle from across the street. The doorman was checking his phone. A small thing. But a doorman checking his phone at 6 in the morning meant a doorman who had stopped believing anyone was watching. The potted cypress trees flanking the entrance, Ray had personally approved that specific variety back in 2003, were yellowing at the tips. 3 weeks without proper water, minimum. The brass fixtures on the revolving door had the dull, matte look of metal that gets wiped but never polished serve a clean. Underneath, neglected, he'd seen it before. In buildings, in organizations, in people, something starts dying from the inside. And for a while, sometimes a long while, the outside still looks fine, still looks impressive, still catches the light the way it always did. Then one day it doesn't. Ray had received the quarterly reports 6 weeks ago. Revenue down 34% over 2 consecutive quarters. Frank Doyle, his CFO, 14 years in the role, had flagged it with a note. Market conditions, increased competition, post-pandemic adjustment. All reasonable explanations. The kind a careful man writes when he wants to sound thorough and be believed. Ray had read them twice. Then he'd called his assistant Linda and told her to clear his weekend. Not because the numbers were wrong, because the numbers felt like a story someone had written to explain something they didn't want him to look at directly. He'd been in this business too long to mistake a bad quarter for a cover story. And he'd been wrong before, plenty of times. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe the market really had just turned. Maybe he'd ride in there, eat a mediocre breakfast, and ride home satisfied that his instincts had finally gone soft with age. Maybe. He sat with the building for 10 minutes, just watching. Then he swung his leg off the Harley, grabbed the worn duffel from the back, and walked across the street. Voice over. My father used to say, if you want to know the truth about a place, don't look at the lobby. Look at the corners. Look at what happens when nobody thinks you're watching. The lobby is what a place wants you to see. The corners are what it actually is. The revolving door turned slow. Ray stepped through into the Sterling Pinnacle lobby and stopped just inside the threshold. Not because he was surprised, because stopping was how he worked. Stand still. Let the room come to you. Let it show you what it is before you start asking questions. The lobby was beautiful. He remembered designing it. The ceiling rose 30 feet. A chandelier, hand-blown Venetian glass, took 3 weeks to source the right manufacturer, cost him more than he wanted to admit, hung at the center, and scattered morning light across the marble floor in pieces. The floor itself was Carrara marble, white with gray veins, the same stone Michelangelo used for his sculptures. Ray had argued for it. When his original architect said it was excessive, it'll last 100 years, Ray had said. That's why it's excessive. The architect had said. Ray had ordered the marble. All of that was still here. Still doing what good materials do. Holding up, staying beautiful, not asking for attention. But Ray's eyes weren't on the chandelier. They were on the bellman station to his left, 2 men in uniform. One young, maybe 22, name tag said Trent, had his back half turned to the entrance, scrolling his phone with the specific concentration of someone who has decided the next few minutes don't require his presence. The other was talking low to a colleague near the luggage cart. Ray walked past them. Neither one moved. Neither one looked up. He crossed to the front desk. A woman and a man working check-in. The woman, Ashley, according to her tag, was helping a couple in expensive coats. Warm smile, leaning slightly forward. The attentive posture of someone genuinely engaged. The man, Corey, looked up when Ray approached. The smile came. Professional, automatic. The kind that lives in the muscles and doesn't require the eyes. Good morning. Corey's tone was the auditory equivalent of a waiting room. Technically courteous. Designed to process, not to welcome. Morning, Ray said. I'd like a room. Do you have a reservation? No. A small pause, the kind that carries information. Let me see what we have available, Corey typed. Ray watched. There's a skill. Ray had learned it somewhere around his 45th year, of watching people without looking like you're watching them. You let your gaze go slightly soft. You look at the whole frame instead of any particular piece of it. You listen to what isn't being said. What wasn't being said right now was, this man doesn't belong here. He could feel it in the lobby. The slight recalibration that happens in a room built for a certain kind of person when a different kind of person walks in. Not hostility. Subtler than that. Adjustment the lobby had adjusted to him the moment he walked through the door. And not in the direction of welcome. We have a deluxe king available on the 12th floor, Corey said. Starting at $4.49 per night, I'll take it. Another pause. Shorter. And will that be credit card? Yes. Ray laid the card on the counter. Cora picked it up, processed it, slid it back without looking at the name. Ray noticed. A name on a card is a name on a card. Most of the time it means nothing. But in a hotel of this caliber, the kind that trains its front desk staff on personalization, on using the guest's name to create connection, not glancing at the name on the card is a choice. It means, I have already decided how much attention this guest deserves, and looking at his name won't change that. Corey handed him the key packet. Elevators are to your right. Checkout is at 11. Do you need anything else? No, Ray said. Thank you. He picked up his duffel, walked toward the elevator. In the reflection of the polished elevator doors, still 20 feet away, he watched Corey turn back to his screen without a second look. Ray pressed the button, waited. To his right, a man in a charcoal suit had just approached the desk. Different Corey, different posture. The smile had moved from the muscles into the eyes. The lean forward came naturally. The voice dropped into a lower, warmer register. Welcome back, Mr. Donovan. Your suite is ready, and we've taken care of the dinner reservation you requested. Same lobby, same desk, same man. To entirely different guests, the elevator opened. Ray stepped in. He stood facing the doors as they closed. In the mirrored walls, he looked at himself. Old boots, old jacket, hair that had gone fully silver about 4 years back, and he'd never bothered to mourn it. The face of a man who'd worked outdoors for too many years and didn't have the softness of someone who'd spent his career behind glass. He looked, he supposed, exactly like what Corey had decided he was. A man who doesn't belong here. The elevator rose. Ray stared at his reflection and thought about a motel in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1987. He'd been 30 years old. He'd gone in to ask about renting a room for a week while he worked a welding contract nearby. The woman at the desk had looked at him. The same look Corey had just given him, and said the motel was fully booked. He'd driven past it. The next morning, the vacancy sign was lit. That motel was gone now. Had been gone for 20 years. The Sterling Pinnacle was still here. Ray had built things that lasted. He intended to keep doing so. Voice over. There's a thing that happens when you spend enough time being invisible. You start to see. Really see. Because nobody's performing for you. Nobody's adjusting. They just act the way they actually act. And sometimes what you see is fine. And sometimes what you see tells you everything you needed to know. Room 1208 was exactly what a 12th-floor deluxe king should be. Ray dropped his duffel on the luggage rack and didn't unpack. He walked the room the way he always walked a room. Not like a guest, like a contractor. Checked the water pressure in the shower. Noted the slight rattle in the HVAC that meant a filter that should have been replaced 2 months ago. Opened the minibar and checked the dates on 2 water bottles. One was expired. The other had 3 weeks left. He took a small notebook from his jacket pocket. The kind with the black cover, the spiral binding. He'd carried one since 1979. Wrote down the time and the problem. 6:41 a.m. Minibar. Expired product. Room 1208. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the ceiling. He thought about what he'd seen in the lobby. Not the lobby itself. He'd seen lobbies for 40 years. He could read a lobby in 30 seconds. He was thinking about the thing underneath the lobby. The architecture of how people were being treated. The invisible sorting system that decided who got the real welcome and who got the performance of a welcome, because there was a difference, a significant one. And the troubling part wasn't that it existed. People had always sorted other people. That was as old as human nature. The troubling part was how smooth it was, how practiced, how naturally Corey had done it, how Trent had done it, how the entire front-of-house operation had done it, without anyone visibly deciding to. That smoothness meant one thing. It had been trained. Not in a manual somewhere, not in a meeting where someone said, "Let's treat certain guests worse." It didn't work like that. It worked the way most bad institutional behavior works. Gradually, through signals and modeling, through what got rewarded and what got ignored, through watching what management responded to and what management let slide. Someone at the top of this building had let something slide for long enough that it had become culture. And culture, Ray had learned, was the hardest thing in the world to fix. Because culture doesn't think of itself as a problem. Culture thinks of itself as just how things are. He stood up. Put the notebook back in his pocket. Time for breakfast. The Pinnacle grill occupied the second floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the street. White tablecloths, fresh flowers, orchids, pale purple, at each table. A piano in the corner that wasn't being played at this hour, but had clearly been played recently. The whole room had the composed, slightly hushed atmosphere of a place that took itself seriously. Ray liked that. He'd taken it seriously too, when he'd designed it. A host named Devin pointed him to a two-top near the windows. Good table. Ray sat and looked around while he waited for someone to bring a menu. He waited 3 minutes. No menu came. The dining room was about a third full. Saturday morning, the slow hour before the brunch crowd arrived. He counted 6 tables occupied. A server, young man, lanky, name tag he'd catch later, said Spence, was working a circular route through the room. Fast enough to look busy, timed well enough to avoid eye contact. Ray watched the route. Covered 4 tables on the left side of the room and 2 near the piano. The 2 tables in the right window section, where Ray was sitting, along with another man eating alone a few tables down, were not on Spence's circuit. The man eating alone had arrived before Ray. He was reading a newspaper. He'd already finished his coffee. His cup had been empty since Ray sat down. Not an accident, Ray thought. A pattern. He caught Spence on a pass near his section, not by waving, just by placing himself in Spence's sightline and holding still. Old trick. The servers who were avoiding a table weren't usually avoiding it consciously. They were following the groove they'd worn into the room. You didn't intercept that by calling out. You interrupted the groove. Spence stopped, looked at Ray. The expression was technically neutral. Menu? Ray said. It's a QR code on the table. Ray looked at the table. There's no QR code on this table. A flicker. Not quite annoyance. Not quite embarrassment. Something between the two, quickly smoothed over. I'll grab you one. He came back 90 seconds later with a laminated card, dropped it on the table without stopping, and continued his circuit. Ray ordered when Spence came back around. Eggs over easy, wheat toast, orange juice, black coffee. Simple food. The kind of food a kitchen should be able to do well in its sleep. The coffee came. It was good. He'd always insisted on the coffee contract, sourced from a small roaster in Portland who'd been sending the same blend to Callahan properties for 9 years. The food took 19 minutes. The eggs were over hard. The toast had been buttered when warm and had gone cold and slightly soggy. The orange juice was fresh squeezed and good. The citrus juicer he'd approved in 2004 apparently still worked. He ate what was edible, drank the coffee, and he listened, 2 tables to his left, the kind of table Spence's route did cover. A pair of men in their late 40s were talking, both in sport coats. One had a watch Ray recognized as a Patek Philippe. The other had the easy posture of someone accustomed to being accommodated. Spence had been to their table 3 times in the time it took Ray's food to arrive. Water refilled. Bread basket offered. Today's specials described, with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasms. The conversation drifting over from that table was mostly business. Revenue projections. Some deal in the Milwaukee market. Normal restaurant background noise. But then, Ray wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but a dining room with good acoustics and a natural gap in ambient sound will carry voices whether you want them or not. He caught something different. Whitmore's bringing the Donovan Group in through the back channel again this weekend. Same setup as last time? The A-list? Treatment? Yeah. Holt signed off on it. As long as they're on the register, they get the full package. Anyone else standard? What about the walk-ins? A short laugh. Walk-ins get what walk-ins get. Ray picked up his coffee cup, took a slow sip, set it back down. A list. Standard. He turned the words over in his mind, not shocked. He'd had a suspicion walking into the dining room. What he'd just heard wasn't proof of anything specific. It was 2 people talking in the careless way people talk when they're confident no one relevant is listening. But what it confirmed was the shape of the thing. There was a formal system, the hotel's published service standards, the brand promise, the values that Ray had written himself in 2003 in a 2-page document he'd given to his first general manager. And then there was an informal system running alongside it, a parallel operation that decided, before guests ever arrived, what category they fell into and what they were owed. Ray didn't know yet where that parallel system came from, who built it, how deep it went, what it was actually for, but he knew it existed now. He'd seen its effects in the lobby. He'd experienced it at this table. And he'd just heard 2 of its operators discuss it like it was as routine as the breakfast service. He signaled for the check. Spence brought it in under a minute. The fastest Ray had been served all morning. He left a 20% tip. Not because the service had earned it. Because the man who might be on the wrong side of a management failure didn't deserve to lose money over something his bosses had built. He went back upstairs to the room, sat in the chair by the window, opened the notebook, and started writing down everything he'd seen since 6:41 that morning. Voiceover. My father worked on cars his whole life. 38 years. Every single customer who came through that garage door got the same thing. The actual problem diagnosed, the actual fix applied, a fair price, and his word that the work was good. Didn't matter if they drove a Cadillac or a 10-year-old Chevy with a cracked dashboard. He said, the car doesn't care what you can afford. The problem is the problem. The fix is the fix. I built an entire company on that idea. And somewhere between the founding and today, this building had forgotten it. He came back downstairs at 9:15, not because he was done looking. He wasn't close to done. But he'd seen enough of the horizontal picture, what guests experienced. And now he needed a vertical view. He needed to see how the management layer responded when someone pushed back. He went to the front desk. Asked for the general manager, Corey. Different Corey than this morning, actually. This was a shift change. New person, but same posture. Same surface-level smile. Said he'd see if Mr. Holt was available. Ray waited in a chair in the lobby. 12 minutes. Sterling Holt arrived through a door behind the front desk that staff used to move between back of house and the lobby floor. He was 41 years old, though he could have passed for younger. Medium height, lean build, a suit that fit. The way suits fit when someone has gone to the trouble of having them tailored. Dark hair, clean cut. The kind of appearance that communicates without saying anything, that this person has invested in himself and expects that investment to be respected. His smile was excellent. Ray had seen a lot of smiles in his life, and he'd learned to read them the way a mechanic reads engine sounds, by what they were covering. Holt's smile was covering assessment. He was reading Ray the moment he stepped forward to shake his hand, reading the jacket, the boots, the duffel still upstairs in room 1208. Calculating, Mr. Callahan? The handshake was firm, professional. Sterling Holt, General Manager. I understand you wanted to speak with me. I do, Ray said. Thank you for your time. They sat in a pair of chairs near the window. Holt crossed his ankle over his knee. Relaxed posture, controlled. Ray put his notebook on the table between them, open to the page he'd been writing on since 6 that morning. He didn't read from it. He didn't need to. He'd written it so he could think clearly, not so he'd have a script. I checked in this morning, Ray said. I've been in the lobby, the dining room, and my room. I want to tell you what I observed, of course. Holt's tone was the tone of a man who has sat through many guest feedback conversations and has become skilled at hearing them without being affected by them. Ray described what he'd seen, methodically, without drama. The bellman on his phone, the front desk service calibration, the visible difference between how guests were greeted based on appearance, the dining room, the QR code that wasn't there, the 19-minute wait, the food quality, the expired minibar product, the HVAC filter, and then, more carefully, the conversation he'd overheard at the table to his left. The words A-list and standard. He laid all of it out the way he used to lay out a construction problem for a contractor who'd done substandard work. Not angry, not accusatory, just precise, because precision was harder to dismiss than emotion. Holt listened. He nodded at appropriate intervals. He made the small sounds of acknowledgement that good listeners learn to make. He held the relaxed posture throughout. When Ray finished, Holt said, I appreciate you taking the time to share this with me. Your experience at the front desk and in the dining room doesn't reflect the standards we hold our team to, and I'll address that directly. Ray waited. As for what you may have overheard, Holt continued, I want to be transparent with you. We do have tiered service protocols for certain corporate and long-stay clients. That's fairly standard in luxury hospitality. It's about allocating resources efficiently. I understand tiered loyalty programs, Ray said. What I'm describing is different. What I'm describing is a visible difference in basic human courtesy based on how a guest looks when they walk in the door. A small pause. Something moved across Holt's face. Not the smile held, but something behind it shifted. Mr. Callahan, the voice stayed warm. The Sterling Pinnacle caters to a very specific clientele. Our service model is designed around the expectations of that clientele. I don't say that to be dismissive of your feedback. I genuinely appreciate it. But I think, to be honest with you, you might find that other properties better match what you're looking for in a hotel experience. There it was, said with such smooth professionalism that you could almost believe it was just candid advice. Other properties might suit you better. A sentence that sounded like helpfulness and functioned like a door being shown. Ray looked at Holt for a long moment. He thought about how to respond. He had several options. He could tell Holt exactly who he was right now. Watch that tailored suit go rigid. Watch the smile try to recalibrate. Watch the whole careful architecture of this conversation invert in about 4 seconds. Part of him wanted to do that, not from cruelty, from the bone-deep fatigue of a man who has been sorted incorrectly one too many times. But he didn't, because that wasn't why he was here. He was here to see what this place actually was. And Sterling Holt had just shown him something valuable. Not about the service failures, which were real but fixable. About the management philosophy underneath them. The thing that had grown in the space between the values Ray had written in 2003 and the hotel that existed today. Our service model is designed around the expectations of that clientele, a leadership philosophy that had decided, at some point, that some guests mattered more than others, and had built systems and culture and trained responses around that decision, so thoroughly trained that a general manager could deliver it to a complaining guest with a warm smile and no apparent awareness that he was something broken. Ray stood up. "I appreciate your time," he said. Holt stood as well. Another professional smile. "Let me have Corey arrange a full refund for your stay. No charge for the night, that's not necessary, I insist. It's the least we can do, given your experience." Ray looked at him one more time. "Keep the money," he said quietly. "Put it toward the HVAC filters on 12. He picked up his notebook, walked to the elevator. He went upstairs, packed the duffel, which had never really been unpacked, came back down, checked out. Corey processed the refund over Ray's objection, with the practiced efficiency of someone resolving a complaint by eliminating its financial dimension. Ray walked out through the revolving door. The doorman, still not fully present, though he'd put the phone away, held the door with a minimal nod. Ray walked across the forecourt to where the Harley was parked, at the far end of the motor court. He stood next to it for a moment. Didn't sit down yet. Looked back at the building. He could see the lobby chandelier from here. Fractured light through glass, scattered across a marble floor he'd argued for and won. It was still doing what he'd built it to do. The building wasn't the problem. The building was fine. What had gone wrong was invisible from out here. That was the whole problem with it. He felt something he didn't often feel, not anger. Something quieter and colder, grief. Maybe the specific grief of looking at something you made with your hands and recognizing that it has become something you wouldn't have made. He sat on the Harley. Didn't start it yet. Voice over, you can build something good. You can build it carefully, with the right intentions, with every detail thought through. And then you can get busy. Building, the next thing, managing the growth, putting out fires. And while you're looking somewhere else, thing you built starts to change. Not all at once, just gradually. One small compromise at a time. One overlooked signal at a time. Until one day you walk back into it as a stranger and you see what it actually became while you weren't watching. That's not a business problem. That's a failure of attention. And in my experience, attention is the only thing you can never delegate. He sat on the Harley for 20 minutes. He was counting them. 20 minutes since Holt had told him, in the language of professional courtesy, that he didn't belong in the building Ray had built with his own money and his father's example. 20 minutes to sort through what he knew and what he didn't know and what needed to happen next. What he knew. The service culture at Sterling Pinnacle was broken, and it was broken in the systemic way, not the individual way. This wasn't a bad apple situation. You don't get synchronized behavior across bellman, front desk, dining, and management without a culture that had selected for it and sustained it. What he knew, someone had mentioned the A-list, and Holt signed off on it in the same breath, which meant this wasn't emergent staff behavior. This was sanctioned from above, maybe encouraged, maybe designed. What he knew, the quarterly numbers showed revenue down 34%, but the explanation had always felt thin. Markets turned, but not usually this fast, without a more specific cause. What he didn't know yet was the connection between those things. Whether there was one, whether the bad service culture was the cause of the revenue decline, the slow bleeding of a property's reputation and repeat business, or whether it was a symptom of something else, something underneath. He took out his phone, called Frank Doyle. Frank was 61 years old and had been Ray's CFO for 14 years. He had the voice of a man who had delivered a lot of complicated information over those 14 years and had learned to lead with the facts and save the editorializing for when Ray asked for it. "Ray, I wasn't expecting you until Monday. I'm in Chicago. I spent the morning at the Pinnacle." A pause. Frank knew what Ray spending a morning at a property without announcing it meant. How bad. Service culture is broken, top to bottom. Someone trained this team to sort guests by appearance and give tiered treatment based on that sorting. It's institutional? Okay. But that's not what I'm calling about. I need you to pull something for me. Name it. Vendor contracts. Sterling Pinnacle. Everything signed in the last 24 months. And the HR separation records. How many people left, what their exit codes were, what the exit timeline looked like. I want both of those in my hands by 6 o'clock today. Frank was already typing. Ray could hear it. That's a lot of documents, I know. Get Terry and Wallace to help you pull it. What are you looking for? Ray thought about how to answer that. He wasn't sure yet what he was looking for. He was looking for what the numbers were hiding. He was looking for the thing that explained why a property with a strong location, an established brand, and a repeat corporate client base was declining at this rate. I'll know it when I see it, he said. What I need from you right now is the raw data. All right, a pause. Ray, is there something specific that spooked you? Beyond the service stuff? Ray thought about the two men at the table in the dining room. The easy, unguarded way they'd talked about A-lists and walk-ins. The confidence of people who'd been running a system long enough to stop worrying being overheard. Not yet, he said. But something's wrong here, Frank. Wrong in the organized way, not the sloppy way. I just don't have the shape of it yet. I'll have everything to you by 5. 6 is fine. And Frank, don't flag this internally. Don't tell anyone what you're pulling or why. Just pull it. Another pause. Longer. Frank understood what that instruction meant. It meant Ray was worried the information pipeline had a leak. Understood, Frank said. Ray hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand. The city moved around him. Delivery trucks. A couple walking a dog. A cab pulling through the hotel's motor court, dropping off a man with luggage that probably cost more than Ray's first truck. Then the phone rang again. The number wasn't in his contacts. Chicago area code, but not one he recognized. He answered, Callahan. Mr. Callahan, the voice was measured. A man. Middle-aged, he'd guess. The particular flatness of someone who had rehearsed this call. I understand you had some concerns this morning. I wanted you to know they've been noted. Ray kept his own voice level. Who am I speaking with? Someone who'd like this to stay a quiet weekend. Is that right? You've seen what you needed to see. The service issues will be addressed. Sometimes properties drift. It gets corrected. No need to make a bigger thing of this. Ray said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago that silence was its own kind of pressure. Let it build. Let the other person fill it. The voice continued, slightly less composed. You have a lot of properties, Mr. Callahan. This is one building. In the scheme of things, Ray said. It's still mine. He ended the call, sat for a moment. Then he called his assistant, Linda. I need you to book me a room at the Marriott on Adams. Standard room. My name. And I need Patricia Reeves. Have her clear her Monday morning. I'll explain. I see her. Is everything all right? It will be. I also need you to reach out to Cal Briggs. You have his number in the contacts under personal. Tell him I might need a favor Sunday night. Just want to know if he's available. Got it. Anything else? Ray looked back at the Sterling Pinnacle one more time. Yeah, he said. See if you can track down a former employee. Beverly Oaks, worked at the Pinnacle for 14 years. Find her quietly. He started the Harley. The engine turned over with the deep, even sound of a machine that had been properly maintained. Not flashy, just reliable. The way Ray liked his things. He pulled out of the motor court, merged into the flow of Michigan Avenue traffic. The Sterling Pinnacle shrank in his mirrors. He had 32 hours until the quarterly review board meeting, where Garrett Wynn's internal audit report, the one that had generated those careful, plausible explanations for the revenue decline, would be formally presented to the board and, if approved, would become the official institutional record of what had happened at this property. 32 hours. He'd been a welder. He knew how to work a deadline. He accelerated. The city blurred past on both sides. The Harleys settled into its rhythm. And Ray Callahan, who had been told this morning, in the practiced language of upscale dismissal, that he didn't belong in his own building, rode toward the truth he intended to find. The Marriott on Adams was 4 blocks from the Sterling Pinnacle. Ray had chosen it deliberately. Close enough to work from, far enough to think clearly. He needed ground that wasn't Garrett Wynn's ground. The room was a standard king, clean, functional, no pretense. The kind of room that did exactly what a room was supposed to do and didn't ask for your admiration doing it. Ray liked that. He'd spent the morning in a building that was all pretense and he needed to breathe different air for a while. He sat up at the small desk by the window. Notebook open. Pen. His laptop. A 4-year-old ThinkPad that Linda had tried to replace twice and he'd declined twice. It worked. That was enough. Frank's files arrived at 5:47. A secure file transfer. 3 folders. The email that came with them had no subject line, just a message. All pulled direct from accounting and HR archival. Nobody flagged. F. Ray opened the first folder, vendor contracts, 18 months of them. He didn't have an accounting background. He'd learned finance the hard way. The way you learn everything when you build a company without a trust fund or a business degree behind you. He'd learned it because he had to, because somewhere around year 4 of running his first real hotel, he'd understood that the numbers were a language, and if you couldn't read the language, other people would read it for you. And not always honestly. He read slowly, methodically, the way he used to read blueprints, looking for the thing that was slightly off, the line that didn't match the line next to it. The first 20 contracts looked normal. Established vendors, line and supply, HVAC maintenance. The Portland coffee roaster he'd approved in 2004 still there, still good. Food and beverage suppliers with 10-year histories, with the Callahan brand. The kind of vendor relationships that were boring and reliable and the backbone of any well-run operation. Then he hit contract number 23, a cleaning supply vendor. Company name, Pinnacle Supply LLC. Contract value, $340,000 over 18 months. Services, janitorial supplies and equipment. Ray stopped. He knew his cleaning supply contracts. He'd standardized them across all Callahan properties 8 years ago. A single national vendor with volume pricing that saved the portfolio roughly $200,000 annually. That contract was current. He'd reviewed it himself last year. So who was Pinnacle Supply Solutions LLC? He opened a second tab, looked up the business registration, Delaware LLC, registered 14 months ago. Registered agent listed was a law firm that specialized per its website in entity formation and registered agent services, a firm that formed other companies, not a firm that cleaned anything. He wrote the name down. Kept going contract 27, event staffing. A company called Sterling Events Group, $280,000, registered in Delaware. 18 months old contract 31, technology consulting. Horizon Digital Partners, $410,000, Delaware. 14 months old, 3 contracts. Just under $1 million combined, all signed within the same 6-month window. All going to companies formed within the same year those contracts were signed. All in Delaware, where business registration costs less and requires less disclosure than almost any other state. Ray sat back. He knew what Delaware registrations meant. He'd used them himself, legitimately, for holding companies and real estate structures where they made sense. Delaware wasn't inherently suspicious, but 3 new companies, all formed in close proximity, all landing major contracts at the same property, all through the same approval chain, that had a pattern to it. Patterns meant something was being built. He called Frank. "I see them," Frank said. He'd been expecting the call. "How many total?" "I count 6 vendor contracts that fit the profile. 3 I hadn't flagged yet. They're smaller, under 200,000 each. But same formation timeline, same state, same approval chain. Who signed off on all of them at the property level?" "Sterling Holt. GM signature on all 6. And above Holt, a pause. Regional VP approval. Garrett Wynn's signature on 4 of the 6. The other 2 were within Holt's local approval threshold, under 300,000. So they didn't require regional sign-off. Ray wrote Wynn 4 contracts. Holt 6 contracts. Total value, across all 6, $2.4 million. Give or take, $2.4 million. Paid to 6 companies that, as far as Ray could tell, had been formed specifically to receive that money. Frank, who's on the internal audit committee for the Midwest region? The pause this time was longer. Ray, Frank said. Garrett Wynn chairs the Regional Audit Oversight Committee. Ray set down his pen. He looked out the window. The Chicago sky had gone the flat gray of late afternoon. A few floors below, a cab was unloading a family with too much luggage. Normal Sunday. Normal city. So the person who approved the contracts, Ray said slowly, also chairs the committee that reviews whether those contracts were appropriate. Yes. And the audit report going to the board Monday is the report from that committee. Yes, Ray was quiet for a moment, not because he was surprised. He'd been a builder long enough to recognize load-bearing elements. And what Frank had just described was the load-bearing element of a structure designed not to build anything, but to protect something, Frank. The 6 vendor companies. I need to know who owns them. The actual owners, not the registered agents. That's harder. Delaware LLCs don't require public disclosure of beneficial ownership. You'd need either a court order or someone on the inside who knows. Work what you can access. Corporate filings, tax documents we might have on file. Anything the vendors submitted when the contracts were processed. There should be W-9s, I'll dig. One more thing. The HR separation records. I was waiting for you to get there, Frank said. 71% staff turnover in 18 months. I've been doing this job for 14 years, Ray. I have never seen a number like that outside of a property that was closing. What do the exit codes say? That's the part that bothered me. Voluntary resignation across the board. Everyone who left, according to the paperwork, left voluntarily. No terminations, no performance issues, just a wave of people deciding, one after another, that they wanted to work somewhere else. How does that read to you? Frank didn't hesitate. It reads like someone was making the environment uncomfortable enough that people left on their own, which means there'd be no wrongful termination exposure. No unemployment claims to contest, just a slow, clean exodus that looks, on paper, like natural attrition. Ray thought about Nora Calvert. The name Owen Pruitt had said that morning. 3 HR complaints, all blocked before they reached the HR department. The exit wasn't voluntary. It was engineered. I'll call you later, Ray said. Keep digging on the ownership question. He hung up, looked at his notebook. The shape of the thing was starting to form. Not complete yet, but he could see the outline. Someone had built a machine inside his building. A machine that extracted money through fraudulent vendor contracts, managed the workforce into compliance or departure, and protected itself through control of the audit process. It was elegant, in the grim way that efficient, corrupt systems are always elegant. Every piece served the whole. Every piece protected every other piece. The question that remained was, who built it? Holt was an operator. Holt signed things. But the architecture of what Ray was looking at, the Delaware registrations, the audit committee control, the layered approval chains, that wasn't an operator's work. That was a strategist. Garrett Wynn had been regional VP for 3 years. 3 years was exactly how long this had been running. Voice-over. In construction, there's a term, hidden defect. It's a flaw in a structure that isn't visible on the surface. The concrete looks solid. The beam looks straight. The joint looks clean. But underneath, something was done wrong. Maybe carelessly, maybe deliberately. And it stays hidden until the load increases. Until the pressure finds it. Then the whole thing shows what it always was. I'd spent 30 years building things designed to last. And I had not been paying enough attention to notice when someone had introduced a hidden defect into the middle of mine. He found her through Owen's hint and Frank's HR files, Nora Calvert, 59 years old. Housekeeper, assigned to floors 9 through 11. 13 years of employment at the Sterling Pinnacle. Her HR file was, on paper, immaculate. Consistent performance reviews, no disciplinary actions, 2 commendations from guests that had been formally logged. The kind of file that belonged to a person who showed up, did the work, and didn't cause problems, except for 3 complaint submissions, filed through the internal HR portal over a 6-month period. All 3 marked received at the regional HR intake level. None of them with any follow-up notation, no acknowledgement, no investigation record, no response. They had simply stopped moving. Frank had flagged it when he pulled the file. These 3 submissions appear to have been held at the regional intake level and never forwarded to HR proper. Regional HR intake reports to Garrett Wynn's office. Ray had read that 3 times. 3 times a woman had reached for the system that was supposed to protect her. 3 times the system had quietly swallowed what she sent and given nothing back. And she'd kept showing up. 13 years in, still showing up, still doing the work. And not a single person, with the authority to change anything, had ever known she'd tried to say something. That wasn't a bureaucratic failure. That was a door being held shut. Ray texted Owen Pruitt the way Owen had communicated with him. Short. No identifying information. Can you get word to Nora Calvert that someone wants to speak with her? Off property. Her choice. No pressure. 20 minutes later. She'll meet. Corner of Wabash and Van Buren. 4 p.m. She's on break at 3:45. Ray was there at 3:50. The corner of Wabash and Van Buren was not a picturesque spot. The L ran overhead, rattling the air every few minutes with the particular thunder of Chicago's elevated train. A coffee shop on the ground floor of an office building. The kind of place that served its purpose, without trying to be anything more than that. Nora Calvert was already there when he arrived, sitting at a table near the back, both hands around a paper cup of coffee watching the door. She was 59 years old and carried it honestly. Dark hair going silver at the temples, face that had seen weather. The posture of a woman who had learned to take up a precise and deliberate amount of space. Not too much, not too little. She watched Ray cross the room and didn't look away. He sat down across from her, didn't extend his hand right away, let her read him the way she needed to. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Owen said you wanted to talk." Her voice was steady, measured. He didn't say why. He didn't say who you were. Ray reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the card he'd been carrying since he left the Sterling Pinnacle that morning. He set it on the table between them and slid it toward her. She looked at it. "Read the name. Read the title." Looked up at him. "You're the owner." Yes, she held his gaze for a long time. He didn't look away. He'd learned that too. That the people who most needed to be believed rarely got to look from someone in the eye and have them look back without flinching. "I went to the hotel this morning," Ray said, "as a regular guest. No announcement. I checked in, ate breakfast, had a conversation with Mr. Holt. I was asked to find accommodation elsewhere. Something moved in Nora's expression. Not surprise. Something more like recognition. The look of someone hearing a story they already know the ending of. "I found your HR submissions in the employee records," Ray continued. "All 3 of them. I saw where they stopped." She was quiet. "I'd like to understand what you tried to report," he said. "If you're willing to tell me, you don't have to. There's no obligation here. Whatever you say or don't say today, your employment is not affected." She looked at her coffee cup, turned it slowly in her hands. "I tried 3 times, she said finally. "The first time was about the overtime. They were asking us to stay late. Not asking, more like telling, except not in writing so you couldn't point to anything. 2, 3 hours after our shifts. No pay. They said it would be logged as project hours and compensated later. Later never came. How many people? On my floors. 4 of us regularly. But it was happening on other floors too. I'd hear about it in the break room." She paused. The second complaint was about Marcy. Marcy Denton. She'd been there 9 years. She asked about the overtime pay directly. Not to me, to her floor supervisor. The next week she got moved to the early morning shift, 5 a.m., which she'd told management she couldn't do because of her daughter's school schedule. 2 weeks after that she was gone. Left voluntarily, according to HR. Ray wrote Marcy Denton in the notebook. "The third complaint," Nora said. "I filed that after I found out the first 2 hadn't gone anywhere. I filed it, and I asked for a confirmation that it had been received. The confirmation came from the regional intake system, and then nothing. For 4 months. Nothing." Ray looked at her. "And you kept coming to work." "I have a mortgage," she said, simply, without apology. "I'm 59 years old. I've been in hospitality my whole working life. You know what the options are for a 59-year-old housekeeper who leaves a job under a cloud. They're not good options." The L train rattled overhead. The coffee shop shook slightly, the way it probably shook 100 times a day. Nora didn't flinch. Long-term resident of that corner of Chicago, Ray guessed. "You stopped noticing the trains after a while." "There are others," she said. 12 that I know of personally. Same situation, overtime pressure, complaints that went nowhere, people slowly being pushed out. Beverly Oaks was the worst of it. 14 years. Beverly filed a complaint directly to the main HR email, not the regional portal, the actual corporate address. She told me she'd done it. She was proud of herself. 2 weeks later, she was terminated, officially for performance issues. Beverly Oaks. The name Ray had given Linda that morning. "What kind of performance issues?" he asked. "She cleaned rooms," Nora said. She'd been cleaning rooms for 14 years without a single formal complaint. Then suddenly there were documented issues with her work. 3 in 2 weeks. I saw 2 of those rooms after she cleaned them. They were fine. She paused. The documentation existed because someone created it. Ray closed the notebook. Not because he'd stopped listening. Because some things deserve to be received without the distance of writing. Mrs. Calvert, he said, I owe you an apology. Not for what was done. That was done by people I intend to hold accountable. But I owe you an apology for the conditions that made it possible. For the distance I allowed to grow myself and what was happening in this building. She looked at him steadily. That's a surprising thing for a man like you to say. Why? Because men like you don't usually say it. Men like me made a lot of mistakes on the way to being men like me. Ray's saying it doesn't fix anything. But it's where I have to start. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what are you going to do? I'm going to find out the full shape of it, and then I'm going to correct it. Starting at the top, she nodded slowly. Not with relief, she'd been disappointed too many times for easy relief, but with the careful, provisional trust of a person who has decided to believe something, because the alternative is to stop believing in anything. Owen, she said. He's a good man. He's been carrying something heavy. I don't know what, but you should talk to him properly. I will, Ray said. Tonight. He walked her back to the L station, watched her go through the turnstile. She didn't look back. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The city moved around him. He thought about 13 years of showing up. 13 years of doing the work correctly, and watching the people who did it with you get pushed out one by one. 13 years of filing complaints into a void. 13 years of a person who deserved better not getting it. He turned and walked back toward the Marriott. He had phone calls to make and hours left before morning. Voice over. The people who keep showing up. That's who holds a thing together. Not the people at the top. The people who get there at 6 in the morning and do the actual work and go home and come back and do it again. They are the institution, the management, the leadership, the organizational structure. All of it is just scaffolding. The building is the people. When you lose sight of that, you've lost sight of everything that actually matters. Frank called at 7:40. Ray was at the desk in the Marriott room, working through the vendor contract files again. He'd ordered room service, a club sandwich and coffee, the kind of meal you eat when eating is functional and not the point. I found something, Frank said. He had the careful tone of a man delivering information he would have preferred not to find. On the W-9s. The vendor tax forms submitted when the contracts were processed. Go ahead. 4 of the 6 companies submitted W-9s with EIN numbers that trace back through the IRS public database to a registered tax preparer in Wilmington, Delaware. A firm called Keystone Financial Services. Small outfit. Mostly entity formation and tax filing for LLCs. That's the same kind of firm as the registered agents, yes. But here's the thread I pulled. Keystone Financial Services has a client list that's partially visible through some business filing cross-references. Not the clients themselves, but certain affiliated entity names that show up in multiple filings. One of those affiliated names appears in a public property record from 3 years ago. A commercial real estate transaction in Milwaukee. Ray set down the sandwich. Transaction? A hotel property. The Lakefront Suites in Milwaukee. Former Callahan property. Sold 2 years ago. About 8 months after Garrett Wynn took over as regional VP, Ray went still. The Lakefront Suites. He remembered it. A mid-market property. Solid location. Steady corporate occupancy. He'd sold it after the board had agreed that the portfolio needed to concentrate on the flagship luxury tier. It had sold below what Ray thought it was worth. But the board had presented a market analysis supporting the price, and Ray had signed off. Who bought it? He asked. A real estate investment group. Consolidated Midwest Hospitality Partners. Incorporated in, you can probably guess, Delaware. 2 years ago, at a price that was 18% below the appraiser's high-end estimate. A pause. Ray, the same Keystone Financial Services name, appears in the entity filings for Consolidated Midwest Hospitality Partners. Ray leaned back in the chair, looked at the ceiling. The picture was widening. Sterling Pinnacle was not the whole picture. Sterling Pinnacle was the current operation. But 2 years ago, before Sterling Pinnacle, before the vendor contracts, before the workforce exodus, there had been Milwaukee, a Callahan property, sold under value, to an entity connected to the same financial infrastructure that was now running the contractor scheme at the Sterling Pinnacle. Frank, how many properties did Wynn oversee in the 2 years before Sterling Pinnacle became his focus? Let me check. Keyboard sounds. He had oversight of 6 properties in the Midwest region. Of those 6, 2 were sold during his tenure. The Lakefront Suites in Milwaukee and the Garrison Hotel in Indianapolis. Both sold in an 18-month window. Both below appraised value? Pause. The Indianapolis sale was within the appraised range, but on the low end. And looking at the buyer entity, I'd need more time to trace it. But the structure looks similar. 3 properties. A pattern in Milwaukee. A pattern beginning at Sterling Pinnacle. And the possibility of Indianapolis in between. This was not opportunistic theft. This was a methodology, a repeating process. Find a property. Install the vendor scheme to extract cash in the short term. Manage the workforce into compliance or departure to reduce costs and eliminate witnesses. Control the audit process to keep the financial picture clean. Then, at the right moment, sell the property below value to a connected buyer, a machine for converting Ray Callahan's assets into someone else's money. And it had been running for at least 3 years without anyone seeing it clearly enough to stop it, Frank. Ray's voice was level. He'd decided, in the 30 seconds since he'd understood the full shape, that feeling it would have to wait. Right now there was work. Monday's board meeting, Wynn's audit report. If that report is accepted, what happens to the paper trail we've been looking at? The audit report establishes the official institutional record for the period it covers. If it's accepted by the board, it supersedes the raw data. Future audits would reference it as the baseline, which means the vendor contracts get legitimized as historical record. Effectively, yes. And the workforce numbers, the 71% turnover, that gets explained away by whatever narrative Wynn has built into the report. His report characterizes it as strategic workforce restructuring in response to market conditions. I read the summary he circulated. Ray looked at his notebook. The clock on the wall said 7:53. The board meeting was Monday at 2 p.m. 34 hours from now, give or take. Okay, he said. Here's what I need. Everything you have on those Delaware entities, documented, sourced, printable. Everything on the Milwaukee sale, the Indianapolis sale, the vendor W9 connections. I need a package I can put in front of Patricia Reeves tonight and in front of the board tomorrow. I can have it ready by 10, good. Ray paused. Frank, you've been doing this job a long time, 14 years. Have you ever seen anything like this before? In this portfolio? A long silence. Not the silence of someone who didn't know the answer. The silence of someone choosing how honest to be. No, Frank said. Not at this scale. Not this organized. Another pause. Ray, whoever built this knew the company well enough to know where the gaps in oversight were. The audit committee structure. The regional approval thresholds. The HR intake routing. This wasn't designed by someone guessing. This was designed by someone who understood how Callahan Grand Collection operates from the inside. Ray had already had that thought. He hadn't wanted to have it, but he'd had it. Garrett Wynn had been recommended for the regional VP position by a departing board member. Someone who had known the organization for years. Someone who had understood the architecture of oversight well enough to identify exactly where persons operate without being seen. The board member who had made that recommendation had retired 18 months ago. His name was Desmond Krause. Ray wrote the name at the top of a fresh page in his notebook. 10 o'clock, he said. I'll be awake. He hung up and sat with the notebook in front of him. The food had gone cold. He didn't notice. Voice over. There's a particular kind of betrayal. The kind that comes from inside. Not from a competitor. Not from a market shift. From someone who sat across a table from you and used what they learned there against you. It's different from other betrayals. It goes deeper. Because what was taken wasn't just money or property. What was taken was trust. And trust, once it understands what was done to it, doesn't go back to where it was. It goes somewhere harder, somewhere more careful. That's not cynicism. That's what trust looks like after it's grown up. Owen Pruitt arrived at the Marriott at 9 p.m. He came in through the side entrance off Quincy Street, the way someone comes in when they're not certain they want to be seen arriving. Ray met him in the small seating area off the lobby. Nobody else around. Quiet corner. The hotel was the kind of place where nobody paid much attention to anyone else. Owen was 48 years old and had the build of a man who'd stayed in shape not for appearance, but out of habit. The compact, low center of gravity fitness of someone who'd worked physical jobs and never stopped. He'd been a Chicago PD officer for 9 years before transitioning to private security. He'd been head of security at the Sterling Pinnacle for 6 years. 6 years was a long time to watch something. He sat down across from Ray. Didn't take off his jacket. His hands rested on his knees, not on the table. The posture of someone who wasn't sure yet how settled to get. Ray didn't waste time. "Thank you for what you said this morning." Owen nodded once. Said nothing. "You've been there 6 years," Ray said. "So have the patterns I'm looking at. You've seen this develop, some of it," Owen said. "Not all of it. There are things I know about, and things I've put together from what I've seen. And then there are things I know I don't know. Start with what you know." Owen looked at the table for a moment. Then at Ray. "About 14 months ago," he said, "Holt installed a new protocol for security footage retention. Cut the standard archival period from 90 days to 30. Said it was a data storage cost reduction. But that's not what it was. The storage cost for 90 days of footage at that property is about $40 a month in cloud storage. It's nothing. It's less than nothing in a property budget that size." He paused. 30 days means anything older than a month is gone. Which means if you want to go back and look at something that happened 6 weeks ago, there's nothing to look at. Except, Ray said, for anyone who might have been keeping copies. Owen's jaw moved slightly. "About 8 months ago, I started making personal backups, encrypted, my own storage. Not connected to anything on the hotel network." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a USB drive, set it on the table between them. 90 days, he said. The full 90-day archive I would have had, if the retention policy hadn't changed. Running from about 3 months ago through last week, Ray looked at the drive. "Why are you doing this now?" Owen was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has something specific inside it. 6 years ago, he said finally, when I took this job, I told myself I was done with things that weren't my problem. 9 years on the force, I'd seen enough of other people's problems becoming mine. I wanted to work, do the job, go home, keep my head down. He looked at the USB drive, and I did that. For a while it was fine. The property was run well. The people were treated right. It was a good place to work. Then things started changing. Slowly. The way things always change slowly so you almost don't notice. Ray waited. "I noticed," Owen said. "I noticed every step of it. And I told myself it wasn't my department. I told myself I didn't have enough to go on. I told myself a lot of things." He looked up. "I watched Beverly Oaks get walked out of that building after 14 years. I watched her face when they told her. And I told myself there was nothing I could do." He pushed the USB drive toward Ray. "I was wrong about that," he said. "This morning, watching you walk out that door, I realized I'd been wrong about it for a long time." Ray picked up the drive. He understood, without needing to say it, what it cost Owen to admit that. Not in dramatic terms, in the quiet, practical terms of a man who'd spent years carrying the weight of a choice he'd made and living with what it meant. "There's something on there," Owen said. "On the footage. Room 517, that's a small conference room on the 5th floor that Holt started using for meetings that weren't on the calendar. Not in the system, not booked through the front desk, just the room. Used. 3 people. Holt, Wynn, and a third person. I don't have a name for him. His face is never toward the camera. It's a blind spot, and I think he knew where it was." Ray thought about Frank's documents. The Delaware entities. The ownership question Frank couldn't answer from public records. "What can you make out about the third person? Older, 60, maybe older, well-dressed. There's one meeting, about 60 days ago, where his right hand is on the table. There's a ring, unusual ring. Wide band, darker metal, some kind of inset design." Ray was still. He thought about Desmond Krause. The name at the top of the fresh page in his notebook. A man who had retired from the Callahan Grand Collection Board 18 months ago. Who had recommended Garrett win? Who would be, if things had gone differently tonight and tomorrow? Just another retired executive with no active role in anything. I'd like to review the footage tonight, Ray said. If you can walk me through it. That's why I'm here, Owen said. They spent the next 2 hours going through it. Owen had a laptop. He'd organized the relevant clips, the conference room meetings, 7 of them over 60 days, each one between 40 minutes and an hour and a half, each one off calendar. The third man was careful. He knew where the cameras were, or one specific camera was, and he'd positioned himself accordingly. You could see his back, his right hand, occasionally a partial profile when he turned to address one of the others. Not enough for a positive identification, but enough for a ring. Ray watched the clip Owen had flagged, froze it, leaned forward. The ring was distinctive. Wide flat band in what looked like oxidized silver or dark platinum. Inset with something, too small and low resolution to read clearly. But the silhouette of it, the shape, Ray had seen that ring before. He couldn't place it immediately. It was in the category of things you register peripherally without storing consciously. The kind of detail that lives in the back of the mind, waiting for the right context to bring it forward. He let it sit. It would come. Owen, Ray said, tomorrow morning. I'm back to the Pinnacle. I need you available. I'll be there. What I'm going to ask you to do will likely end your employment at that property. Not because I'll end it, because of what comes after. You understand that? Owen looked at him steadily. I've been thinking about that for 8 months. I'm good, Ray nodded. Stood, extended his hand. Owen shook it. The grip of 2 men who understood what the handshake was actually about. After Owen left, Ray sat back down at the desk, opened the notebook to the page with Desmond Krause's name. Thought about the ring. Then he called Frank one more time. Frank, do you have any photos from the board retirement dinner for Desmond Krause? 18 months ago. A pause. Linda would have those. Event photos go to her archive. What are you looking for? His hands, Ray said. Specifically his right hand. Another pause. Frank had been with Ray long enough to not ask why. I'll have Linda pull it tonight. Anything else? That's all, Ray said. Get some sleep, Frank. Tomorrow's going to be a full day. He set the phone down, looked at the USB drive on the desk, then at the notebook, then at the clock. 11:14 p.m. The board meeting was 14 hours and 46 minutes away. He had what he needed. Almost. He just needed the morning to make it mean something. Voice over. There's a moment in every difficult thing when you can see the shape of what has to happen. Not all the details, not every step, but the shape. And you know, with the kind of knowing that's past thinking, that you're going to do it. Not because it's easy, not because you're certain you won't take some damage doing it, but because you can see it clearly now, and you can't unsee it. And once you can see it clearly, there's only one thing left to decide. Not whether, just how. Linda's email came at 12:40 a.m. Ray was still at the desk. He'd switched from coffee to water around 11. Too much coffee and the thinking gets sharp in the wrong direction, tight and circular instead of wide and clear. He'd learned that somewhere around 50. Another thing that came with age that nobody warned you about. You had to manage the instrument more carefully. The email had 3 attachments. Photos from the Callahan Grand Collection Board retirement dinner, 18 months ago. The event had been held at the Sterling Pinnacle, which had struck Ray at the time as a fitting choice. Krause had been on the board since before the Pinnacle was built, had watched it go up, had been at the opening ceremony in 2004. Ray opened the first photo. A group shot. 8 people. Board members, a few senior staff, Linda in the background managing something that needed managing. Krause was near the center, a man in his late 60s, heavy-framed but not heavy, silver hair, the patrician ease of someone who had moved in high-level boardrooms for 30 years. Ray looked at his right hand. Krause was holding a glass of wine. His right hand was at the stem of the glass, and on the 4th finger of his right hand, clearly visible in the photo's good event lighting, was a ring, wide flat band, dark metal, dark silver or oxidized platinum, and at the center some kind of inset motif. Too small in this photo to read clearly, Ray zoomed in. The image pixelated. Not enough resolution at this scale. He opened the second photo. A smaller group. Krause and 2 other board members. his right hand at his side in this one. The ring visible but the hand relaxed, palm slightly turned. Third photo. Kraus alone, taken candidly at the bar. Profile shot. His right hand raised to gesture while he was speaking to someone off camera. The ring caught the light. Ray zoomed in on the third photo. The resolution held better here. It had been taken closer, and with a better camera. He zoomed to maximum. The inset on the ring was a compass rose, 8-pointed, the old navigator's symbol. The kind of image that showed up in Masonic jewelry, in old military rings, in the custom signet rings, that a certain generation of businessmen had made to mark a specific period of their lives or membership in something. Ray sat with that for a moment. Then he went to the footage on Owen's laptop, the clip with the clearest view of the third man's ring. Zoomed in same width, same dark metal, the inset motif, at this resolution, in this light, showed the same 8-pointed structure. Not identical beyond doubt, but not different. He closed both windows, sat back. He thought about what Frank had said. Whoever built this knew the company well enough to know where the gaps in oversight were. Kraus had been on the board for 22 years. He'd been on the audit committee for 16 of them. He'd helped design the oversight structure that was now being used as a shield. And he had recommended Garrett Wynn. And now Wynn's audit report was going to the board at a meeting. Kraus had officially retired from attending, except that Kraus, as a retired board member, retained courtesy observer status at board meetings upon request. Ray pulled up the Monday board meeting agenda that had been circulated to senior staff. Standard distribution. Scrolled to the attendee list. Desmond Kraus. Observer status. Confirmed attendance. Of course, he needed to be there to see the report accepted, to watch the last piece of the machine complete its cycle, and know that the thing he'd built was now properly protected. Ray closed the laptop. He looked at the notebook, at the name at the top of the fresh page, at the ring drawing he'd sketched from memory next to it. This was the part he'd needed. The third man, the architect, the person whose knowledge of the company's structure had made all the rest of it possible. Without Kraus, Wynn was just a competent operator with a scheme. With Kraus, who'd sat in board meetings for 22 years, who'd helped write the audit protocols, who'd been in the room when every structural decision about oversight was made. The scheme had a map, a blueprint for where the walls were thin. Ray had built buildings for 40 years. He knew what you could do with a good blueprint in the wrong hands. He picked up his phone, called Patricia Reeves. She answered on the third ring. He'd warned her she might get a late call. Patricia was 63 years old, had been Callahan Grand Collection's lead outside counsel for 11 years, and had the particular composure of a woman who had spent 4 decades in law and no longer found anything surprising enough to be alarmed by it. "I have the shape of it," Ray said. "I need to walk you through it." "Go ahead." He walked her through it, methodically. The vendor contracts, the Delaware entities, the Milwaukee property, the HR complaints that had been intercepted, workforce engineering, the footage, the ring, the board meeting. Patricia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for 5 seconds. He counted. "Okay," she said. "Here's where you are. What you have is strong circumstantial architecture. The vendor contracts alone create a serious fiduciary liability question for Holt and Wynn. The Milwaukee connection, if Frank can document it properly, opens a potential securities fraud exposure, given that it involved a board-level asset sale. The HR complaint suppression creates significant employment law liability, federal level, given the scale. What about Kraus? That's harder. You have a ring in low-resolution footage. You have a recommendation history. You have timing that fits. But you need more before you can put his name to this, officially in any formal proceeding. "I know," Ray said, "but I need to neutralize the board meeting tomorrow. The audit report can't be accepted. That I can do," Patricia said. "You're the controlling owner. You can instruct the board chair to table any report under active internal investigation, which this now officially is. I'll draft the instruction tonight. You sign it. It goes to the board chair first thing in the morning. The report gets tabled. The meeting proceeds on other agenda items. That takes the report off the table," Ray said. "But Kraus will still be in the room." "Yes," Patricia said. But a man in a room who can't get what he came for is just a man in a room. Whatever he planned to do with that report tonight, that plan fails. Ray thought about that. There was something unsatisfying about it. The practical outcome was correct. The machine would stop. The report would be tabled. The vendor contracts would go to proper investigation. The HR situation would be addressed. The Milwaukee sale would be looked at with new eyes. All of that was correct. But the man who'd spent 22 years on the board, who'd used that time to build his exit plan into the architecture of the organization, would walk out of that meeting as just a retired board member who happened to be observing, for now at least. Evidence took time. Investigations took time. The right outcome wasn't the fast outcome. Ray had been in business long enough to understand that. Draft the instruction, he said. I'll be ready to sign at 7 a.m. I'll have it to you by 6:30, Patricia said. Ray, this is good work. You found it in 32 hours. I should have found it 30 months ago, he said. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You found it now. That's what matters, he said goodnight. Set the phone down. The room was very quiet. Chicago was still out there. It never really went quiet. But at 1 in the morning it had dialed itself down to a low murmur, the ambient glow of a city that didn't fully sleep. Ray opened the notebook one more time, not to write anything, just to look at what was there. Numbers, times, the architecture of something that had been built wrong inside something he'd built right. All of it laid out in his handwriting, in the same black-covered spiral notebook he'd been carrying since before. Most of the people involved in this were out of college. He thought about Nora Calvert. 13 years of showing up, 3 complaints into a void. Still there, he thought about Beverly Oaks. 14 years, walked out the door. Gone. He thought about the break room conversations he'd never heard. The quiet erosion of people who'd been doing good work and had been made to feel like it didn't matter. He thought about his father's garage. Tulsa, 1979. The way Walter Callahan treated every car that came through that door, regardless of what the car was worth, regardless of who brought it in. The problem is the problem. The fix is the fix. Ray had built a company on that. And then he'd built enough of a company that he'd stopped being able to see the floor. And someone had used that distance, that gap between what he intended and what he could see, to build something entirely different inside his walls. He closed the notebook, put it in his jacket pocket. The jacket he'd worn into the Sterling Pinnacle that morning as a man, nobody thought was worth paying attention to. That was tomorrow's jacket, too. He turned off the light, lay down. He didn't sleep immediately. He stared at the ceiling and thought about 32 hours ago, when he'd parked the Harley across from the Pinnacle and looked at a building going wrong and known it without being able to say exactly how. The knowing had been right. The knowing had always been right. Tomorrow he was going to do something about it. Monday morning came in cold, not the dramatic cold of a Chicago winter. Just October doing what October does in this city, reminding you that the warmth was borrowed and the loan is due. The sky was the particular gray of concrete that's been rained on and dried and rained on again. The lake wind came off Michigan Avenue at an angle that found every gap in your jacket. Ray was up at 5:15. He didn't need an alarm. He hadn't needed an alarm since 1991. His body had learned somewhere in his 40s that the day began whether you were ready or not, and it might as well begin on your terms. He showered, put on the same jacket, the same boots, the same jeans. He made that choice deliberately. He could have called Linda and had a suit delivered. She'd have managed it without question. She'd managed stranger requests. But a suit would have meant something he didn't want to mean. Would have meant that the version of him who walked into the Sterling Pinnacle yesterday morning was somehow less valid than the version he'd be today. That the man who'd been sorted and dismissed needed to dress differently to be taken seriously. He didn't believe that. He'd spent 66 years not believing that. The jacket and boots were what he owned. They were what he was. They were staying. Patricia's draft arrived at 6:22. He read it twice. It was clean, precise, exactly what he'd asked for. He signed it digitally and sent it back. At 6:45, 3 vehicles pulled up in front of the Marriott on Adams. Not flashy. 2 standard SUVs and a sedan. Frank Doyle was in the sedan with a banker's box of printed documents. Patricia Reeves was in the lead SUV with her associate and a second box. Cal Briggs was in the second SUV, dressed in civilian clothes, dark pants, a collared shirt, a jacket that didn't quite hide the fact that he was a man who'd spent 30 years in law enforcement. Ray came out through the Marriott's front entrance. No announcement, no staging, just a man walking out of a 3-star hotel on a Monday morning with a worn notebook in his jacket pocket. He shook hands with each of them on the sidewalk. "How are we doing?" Cal asked. He had the easy economy of a man who asked questions because he wanted the actual answer. "We're good," Ray said. "We know what we have. We know where we're going." Cal looked at him for a moment. 40 years of friendship. He could read Ray the way Ray read buildings. "You slept?" "Some." Cal nodded. That was enough. They drove the 4 blocks to the Sterling Pinnacle in convoy, pulled into the motor court at 7:03. The same motor court where Ray had sat on the Harley 2 days ago. The Harley was back at the Marriott's parking structure. Today required different transportation. They stepped out. The same doorman from Sunday morning was on duty. He stepped forward with the professional attentiveness of someone who had clocked the vehicles and was recalibrating in real time. He held the door. Ray walked through without looking at him, not out of contempt, out of focus. The lobby opened around him. The Venetian chandelier, the Carrara marble, the orchids, fresh ones today, white instead of purple. The morning light coming through the glass at the angle it always came through in October, hitting the floor at the angle Ray had designed it to hit when he'd worked with the architect on the building's orientation in 2002. He'd stood in this lobby 1,000 times, as an owner, as a builder, as a guest at his own events. He knew every angle of it. He stopped at the center, under the chandelier. Where the light was clearest, Corey was at the front desk. He looked up, looked at Ray, looked at the group behind Ray, reached for the phone. "Please let Mr. Holt know that Ray Callahan is in the lobby," Ray said. His voice was level, not loud. The lobby's acoustics carried it well. "And could you let Mr. Wynn know as well, if he's in the building? I believe he may be here for the board preparation this morning." Corey's hand hovered over the phone. Something was happening behind his eyes. The processing of information that didn't fit the category system he'd been working from. "Of course, sir," he said. And this time, this morning, the words came out differently. Not from the muscles, from somewhere that understood the moment had changed. Ray turned to Frank, set up in the 3rd-floor conference room. "I'll be up in 10 minutes, Frank nodded. He and Patricia's associate moved toward the elevator with the boxes. Patricia stayed with Ray. Cal stood slightly to the side, hands loose at his sides. The posture of someone who has been in enough significant rooms to know how to occupy space in one, without taking up too much of it. Owen Pruitt appeared from the door behind this security station. He was in his uniform. His face was composed. He met Ray's eyes and gave a single nod. Ray nodded back. They waited. 3 minutes later, Sterling Holt came through the back door at a pace that was trying to look controlled, and wasn't quite managing it. He was in his suit, the same quality of suit as yesterday, possibly the same suit. His face had the look of a man who had received an unexpected piece of information, and had only had 3 minutes to decide what to do with it. He stopped a few feet from Ray. The lobby had continued its morning business around them. The front desk, the bellman station, 2 guests crossing from the elevator to the exit. Life of a hotel. But there was a quality of attention in the room that wasn't about those things. The room knew something was happening at its center. "Mr. Callahan." Holt's voice was steady. The smile was there, but it had a different quality today. Tighter. "Aware, Mr. Holt," Ray said. "I need you in the conference room on 3. And I need Mr. Wynn. Mr. Wynn is in the building, yes, for the board preparation. I'm not sure this is the right time." "It's the right time," Ray said. He walked to the elevator, Patricia beside him. Cal behind. Holt stood in the lobby for 2 seconds, then followed. Voiceover. "There's a difference between authority and power. Power is something you can be given. Authority is something you earn, through what you've built, through the choices you've made, through what you're willing to stand behind when it costs you something. I have never liked using authority, but there are moments when the clearest thing you can do for everyone in the room is simply to be what you are. unmistakably, without apology. So the room understands where things stand. Third-floor conference room had a long table, 14 chairs, and windows that looked east toward the lake. On a clear day, you could see the water from here. Today, the gray sky had erased the horizon. Frank had arranged the documents at the head of the table, not scattered, organized. Specific piles in a specific order. The way you laid out a case you intended to make clearly. Ray sat at the head, Patricia to his left, Cal along the wall, seated, not at the table. An observer as he'd described himself to Ray, a witness. They came in over the next 8 minutes. Holt first. Then the department heads he'd apparently called on his way up. 6 of them, including Spence's floor manager and the front desk supervisor. Then Garrett Wynn. Wynn was 54 years old and carried himself with the particular confidence of someone who had spent years operating in spaces where he believed himself to be the most sophisticated person present. He was well dressed in the way that announced itself. His handshake, when he'd shaken Ray's hand twice over the years at formal events, had the slight excess of pressure that some men use to establish something. He came into the conference room, saw the table arrangement, saw Frank's boxes, saw Patricia Reeves, and recalibrated in one visible beat. He sat down across from Ray, not at the far end, across. He wanted to be able to watch. Ray let everyone settle, didn't rush it, let the room find its level. Then he opened the notebook, not to read from it, to show that it existed, that there were notes, that things had been written down. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he said. "I'll be direct with you. I spent Saturday and Sunday conducting an unannounced review of this property. I identified significant service culture issues on Saturday. Those will be addressed as part of a broader operational correction. But what I found when I looked at the financial records was more serious." He nodded to Frank. Frank set a document in front of each person at the table. 3 pages, clean, readable. The vendor contract summary, the formation dates, the total values, the approval chain. 6 vendor contracts, Ray said. $2.4 million. Paid to companies formed within the window of those contracts. Companies with no operational history. Companies registered in Delaware through the same entity formation infrastructure. He let them read. Let the room absorb it. Wynn's face did not change. Ray watched it carefully. A man with Wynn's experience had practiced the art of receiving difficult information without visible reaction. But there are things that practice can't fully cover. Small muscular events around the eyes. A stillness that's too deliberate. A quality of attention that shifts from engaged to managed. Wynn had shifted. Holt was less practiced. His breathing had changed. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, which was a posture people assumed when they were trying to look calm with their hands. Ray continued, "The HR records show a 71% staff turnover rate over 18 months. I've spoken with current and former employees who describe a consistent pattern: overtime pressure, suppressed complaints, and a manufactured documentation trail used to engineer exits that appeared voluntary." He paused. 3 complaints submitted by a current employee through the internal HR portal were held at the regional intake level and never forwarded to the HR department. Regional intake reports to this regional office. He looked at Wynn. Wynn looked back. "Working. There's also the matter of the Lakefront Suites sale in Milwaukee," Ray said. 2 years ago. Below appraised value. The buyer entity traces through the same Delaware financial infrastructure as the vendor companies here. A silence settled over the room that had texture to it. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say. The silence of people calculating what they were permitted to say. Holt's floor manager, a woman named Greta, who Ray had no reason to connect to any of this, started to speak. "Mr. Callahan, I want to say, I wasn't aware." "I know," Ray said, not unkindly. "This isn't about everyone in this room. Some of you knew. Some of you didn't. Patricia and her team will be meeting individually with each of you today to establish what each person understood and when." He looked around the table. "This is not a criminal proceeding. That may come separately, and that will be in the hands of people other than me. What I'm doing today is stopping what is currently in motion and beginning to correct what was done." He looked at Holt, then at Wynn, Sterling. "Garrett, as of this morning, Both of you are suspended from your roles pending investigation. That's documented, and it's effective now. You're welcome to contact legal counsel. Patricia will provide you with a formal notice after this meeting. Holt looked at the table. Wynne looked at Ray. He had the expression of a man who had prepared for this conversation and had planned something to say in it. His mouth opened slightly. Ray looked back at him. Even. Patient. Wynne closed his mouth. That was the moment. The moment when the room understood completely where things stood. For everyone else, Ray said, and his voice shifted. Not softer exactly, but wider, including more people in it. I want you to understand something. What happened here was built from the top down. The people who were asked to perform below the standard they were capable of. The people who served guests differently based on how they looked, who went along with overtime pressure, who saw things and stayed quiet, because the environment made silence feel like the only option. Those people were failed by the leadership of this building. He let that settle. We're going to fix this. Not quickly, not all at once, but thoroughly. Starting with making sure that every person who is treated unjustly in this building gets what they're owed. And starting with making sure this property becomes what it was supposed to be. He closed the notebook. Patricia will take it from here on the procedural side. Thank you. He stood, walked to the window, looked east at the gray sky where the lake was hiding. Behind him, he heard Patricia begin. Her voice was clear and precise. The voice of someone who knew exactly what came next and was prepared for all of it. Voiceover. I've sat in a lot of difficult rooms over the years. Rooms where money was at stake. Rooms where the future of something I'd built was uncertain. Rooms where I had to deliver news that was going to change things for people. And not all of it for the better. What I've learned about those rooms is this. They go better when you're honest about what happened. Not brutal, not punishing, but clear. People can handle clarity. What they can't handle, what eats at them for years, is the feeling that the people in charge looked at the truth and described something else. Patricia had the room. Ray stepped out into the hallway, walked to the end, away from the conference room door. The hallway was quiet. A housekeeper's cart parked near the far elevator. A woman, mid-40s, loading fresh towels, not paying attention to the management drama one floor above her normal Monday morning. Hotel still running. Whatever was happening in that conference room, floors below it, the work continued. Ray's phone rang. The number was Garrett Wynne's cell. Ray looked at it for a moment. Wynne was still inside the conference room, which meant this was coming from the phone in his pocket. Ray answered, Mr. Callahan. Wynne's voice. Low. The particular compression of someone talking quietly in a room full of people. He'd stepped back from the table, Ray guessed, turned slightly away. Patricia would hear him eventually, but not yet. I think we should speak privately. We're speaking privately now. I mean in person. Before this goes any further, there are aspects of this situation that you don't fully understand, and I think I understand the vendor contracts, Ray said. I understand the Milwaukee sale. I understand the audit committee arrangement. A pause. Shorter than it should have been if Wynne were surprised. The board meeting today, Wynne said. The audit report. If that's tabled, there will be scrutiny of the full regional financials. Not just Sterling Pinnacle. There are complexities across the region that will create. Garrett. Ray's voice didn't rise, didn't harden. He just said the name with the specific weight of a man who had run out of patience for a particular kind of conversation. You're telling me that if I look more closely, I'll find more problems. And I'm supposed to find that discouraging. Silence. I've been in business since before you were out of college, Ray said. I've had hard quarters. I've had properties that lost money. I've had people who worked for me make mistakes and cost me. All of that is part of running something. What is not part of running something, what is not something I correct and move on from, is what you built in this building. What you built was designed to take from people who trusted me enough to come to work every day. That's not a complexity. That's a betrayal. Wynne said nothing. Ray continued. The board meeting happens today on the revised agenda Patricia sent this morning. Your report is tabled. The region goes into full audit by an independent firm. Patricia has 3 on retainer. Whatever the full picture looks like, it gets looked at. All of it. You understand what? Yes, Ray said. I understand exactly what. And my answer is yes. He heard something in the background, Patricia's voice, asking Wynne to return to the table. One more thing, Garrett, Ray said. Desmond Krause is listed as an observer for today's meeting. I'd appreciate it if you didn't contact him between now and 2 p.m. The silence on the line was different this time. It had a quality of recognition in it. The quality of a man understanding that the perimeter he'd believed was secure had been identified. I see, Wynne said. I thought you might, Ray said. Go back to the table. He ended the call, stood in the hallway. The housekeeper at the far end of the corridor had finished loading the towels. She pushed the cart forward, moving to the next room. She knocked. Waited opened with her key. Went in to do the work. Ray watched her for a moment. Then he took out the notebook, wrote down the time of the call, what Wynne had said, what he'd confirmed without meaning to. He went back into the conference room. Voiceover. I learned something a long time ago about the people who build things they shouldn't. They believe, right up until the moment they shouldn't, that the thing they built is more solid than it is. They've lived inside it so long that they've mistaken their own architecture for reality. And when that architecture starts to come down, their first instinct isn't to stop it. It's to negotiate, to find the angle, to locate the exit. Because in their experience, there's always been an exit. The thing they miscalculate every time is that the exit requires the other person to agree to let them use it. By 10:30, the formal proceedings had settled into the methodical pace of institutional correction. Patricia was conducting individual meetings in the smaller room off the conference area. Frank was on calls with the independent audit firm, ranging the scope of engagement. Owen was managing the security handoff. Two members of his team who were clearly entangled in what had happened were being relieved pending review, and he was redistributing coverage without disrupting the property's operation. The hotel continued to function. Check-ins happened. Guests moved through the lobby. The dining room served breakfast at a pace, unaware of anything happening on the floors above it. Ray was in the lobby. He'd come down, not because there was something specific to manage, but because the lobby was where the building's life was most visible. After 2 days of looking at documents and making calls, he needed to be in the actual space for a while, to remember what all the documents were about. He sat in the same chair he'd sat in on Sunday when he'd waited for Holt, the chair near the window. The light came through at the angle he'd designed. Linda had texted him at 9:47, Beverly Oaks confirmed, on her way. She'll arrive around 11. At 10:58, a woman walked through the revolving door. She was 53 years old, medium height, solid build, the purposeful gait of someone who had spent years on their feet in work that required precision. She was dressed neatly. Dark pants, a gray blouse, a jacket that she'd put on, because you put on a jacket when you go somewhere that means something. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was composed in the way a face is composed when you've told yourself 3 times in the car that you're going to be okay and you're going to be okay. She looked around the lobby. Ray stood. She saw him, registered the jacket, the boots, a man she'd never met, and looked at him with the careful assessment of someone who has been disappointed enough times to take their time with new information. He crossed to her, extended his hand. Beverly. I'm Ray Callahan. She shook his hand. Her grip was direct. I know who you are, your assistant explained. Thank you for coming in. She looked around the lobby, taking it in. The chandelier, the marble, the orchids. The front desk where Corey was working. The bellman station where Trent was standing. Today, notably, without a phone in sight. I haven't been inside since February, she said. 14 years, Ray said. This building owes you. She looked at him. Something moved across her face, not immediately sentimental. Something more complicated than that. The look of a woman who had processed an injustice thoroughly enough that simple acknowledgement didn't quite cover it anymore. Filed 3 complaints, she said. The last one went to the corporate email address directly. I stood in my kitchen for 20 minutes deciding whether to send it. I know, Ray said. I've read the record. All 3 submissions. I know where they stopped, and the person who stopped them is suspended as of this morning. The regional intake system is under full audit, and the HR director of this property, the actual HR director at corporate level, not the regional coordinator, is meeting with every current and former employee who submitted a complaint to document what happened. Beverly absorbed that. It was a lot of information at once, and she took a moment with it. There are others, she said. Marcy Denton, Phil Okafor, Sandra Walsh, people who left the same way I left. I have all their names, Ray said. We're reaching out to each of them today. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want from me? Was a fair question. She'd come here not knowing exactly why. She'd come because Linda had explained that the owner of the building wanted to speak with her. She'd come because 14 years of her life had been in this building, and then 1 week it wasn't anymore, and nobody with any authority had ever acknowledged what that meant. 2 things, Ray said. First, I want to offer you your position back, not as a formality, as genuine employment, with a written guarantee of terms that protects you, with back pay for the period since your termination, and with a formal letter clearing your employment record of the performance documentation that was manufactured. Beverly was still. Second, Ray said, I want to apologize to you. In person. Face to face. Not on behalf of the company. As the person who built this place and let conditions develop in it that made what happened to you possible. That's on me. Not entirely. But substantially. She looked at him for a long time. There's a specific look that people give you when they've been waiting for something long enough that receiving it feels almost disorienting. Not disbelief exactly, more like the adjustment that happens when something you'd stopped expecting suddenly arrives. The recalibration of a person who had prepared herself for any outcome except this one. I'm 53 years old, she said. I've been working in housekeeping since I was 24. I'm good at it. I've always been good at it, I know, Ray said. Your file reflects that. 14 years of it, she nodded slowly. Made a decision. I'll think about coming back. I need a few days. Take the time you need. The offer doesn't expire. She looked around the lobby one more time, then back at Ray. You came in on Saturday. As a regular guest, yes, they treated you like I didn't belong here, Ray said. Yes, the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. But how was that? Instructive, Ray said. She looked at him. And then, carefully, provisionally, the way trust comes back when it's been earned rather than assumed. She smiled. She looked at the lobby one more time, at the chandelier, at the marble floor that had held her footsteps for 14 years. Then she said something Ray hadn't expected. I used to stop sometimes, when I'd finished a room, before I moved the cart to the next door. I'd stand in the doorway and look back at what I'd done. She paused. A clean room is a real thing. You can see it. You can feel it. I was proud of that. She looked at Ray. They couldn't take that. Whatever they put in my file, whatever story they told. They couldn't take that part. Ray looked at her. No, he said. They couldn't. She nodded. That was enough. He found Spence at 11:40. The dining room was winding down from the late breakfast rush. Spence was clearing a table near the window, the same window section where Ray had sat on Saturday morning and waited 19 minutes for service. Ray walked in, sat at the same table. Spence looked up, recognized him. His hands slowed on the clearing work. Ray waited. Spence came over. He was 26 years old, had been at the property for 2 years. His performance file showed no issues, which, given everything Ray now knew about how files had been constructed, he took with appropriate caution. But Owen had mentioned Spence specifically. He knew. He went along with it. But he's not built for it. You can tell. Ray had not forgotten that Spence had come to work 2 years ago, with a standard orientation package that told him this was a world-class property, with a commitment to equal service standards, and somewhere in those 2 years has learned that the real standard was different. Sit down, Ray said. Spence looked around the dining room. His supervisor wasn't visible. He pulled out the chair across from Ray and sat on its edge. You know who I am, Ray said. Yes, sir. I spoke with Mr. Holt and Mr. Wynn this morning. They're not going to be here much longer. Spence's jaw tightened. He nodded. I need to understand something, Ray said. When you started here, what were you told about how to treat guests? Spence was quiet for a moment. The training said equal service. Best possible for every guest, and that's what you did in the beginning. For about 3 months, he said. Then my supervisor pulled me aside. The training was the baseline, but there was a system on top of it. Priority guests, VIPs, corporate accounts that those guests needed the A level, and others got standard substitute. And standard meant, Spence looked at the table. Standard meant minimum acceptable, technically correct. Nothing that would get a complaint logged, but not what it should be. And you went along with it. I needed the job, he said. And everyone else was doing it. And when everyone's doing it, it starts to feel like just how things work. Ray understood that. He'd seen it in construction sites, in manufacturing facilities he'd toured, in organizations of every kind. The normalization of the wrong thing. The way a culture absorbs individuals and adjusts them to its shape, without anyone declaring that it's happening. How long ago did it stop feeling normal? Ray asked. Spence looked up. About 4 months ago. There was a man, older, came in on a Saturday afternoon. He was dressed, just regular. Not impressive. My supervisor gave me the look. And I just couldn't do the minimum thing. I gave him the real service. And my supervisor got in my face about it afterward. Ray said nothing. Waited. And then I did it anyway for the next 3 tables that came in. And my supervisor wrote me up. And I thought about quitting. But I stayed. And I went back to the system. He paused. I've thought about that a lot. Ray looked at him. He saw a young man who had encountered a genuine moral test and had found himself to be less than he'd hoped. Not a bad person. A person who'd learned something hard about himself and was carrying it. Here's what's going to happen, Ray said. The system you were working in is being dismantled. The people who built it and ran it are being removed. What comes next is going to require people who actually understand what happened here, what it cost, what it felt like to be on the wrong side of it, and what it costs to admit that. Spence was very still. I'm not firing you, Ray said, but I'm asking you to do something harder than getting fired. I'm asking you to stay, and to be part of making this what it should have been. Can you do that? Spence looked at the table. Then at Ray, yes, he said, quietly, but without hesitation. Ray nodded, stewed. Get back to work, he said, not harshly, just directly. The way his father used to say it in the garage when the talking was done and the work was what was left. Spence stood, picked up the clearing tray. Ray walked out of the dining room, voice over. The hardest person to forgive is never the one who was malicious. It's the one who knew better and went along anyway. Because that one is in all of us. Every person who has stayed quiet when they shouldn't have. Every person who told themselves it wasn't their department. Every person who let the groove of a bad culture carry them forward. Because getting out of the groove cost too much. That's not a monster. That's a human being in a bad system. The question is never whether you went along with something wrong. The question is what you do when someone gives you the chance to do something different. The board meeting happened at 2 p.m. as scheduled. The agenda had been revised as Patricia's instructions specified. Wynn's audit report was listed as tabled pending independent review. The item where it had been, third on the agenda, the position of something expected to pass without significant discussion, was replaced with a brief item, Regional Operations Update, Interim Management. Desmond Krause arrived at 1:53. Ray was in the hallway outside the boardroom when Krause came off the elevator. Krause saw him, 7 feet of hallway between them. Krause was 68 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who had spent decades in rooms where things were decided and had the bearing of it. He was dressed in a dark suit, conservative tie. His right hand, emerging from his jacket sleeve, carried the ring Ray had been looking at in photographs and footage for the past 14 hours. Same dark metal. Same compass rose. They looked at each other. Ray didn't move, didn't speak first. Krause stopped. Something moved across his face. Not panic, he was too composed for that. Something more like the recognition of a man who has played a very long game and has arrived at the board where it ends. Ray, he said. Careful. Measuring. Desmond. Ray's voice was even. I appreciated your years on the board. You built a lot of institutional knowledge into this organization. Krause waited. He understood that what came next was not a compliment. We're going to have a full accounting of everything that happened in the Midwest region, Ray said. The vendor contracts, the Milwaukee sale, Indianapolis, whatever else turns up in the full audit. All of it is going to be examined by independent eyes. Kraus was very still. I don't have enough today to have a specific conversation with you about your role in that, Ray said. What I have is suggestive, but suggesting isn't enough for what I'd want to do with it. He paused. So today, I'm going to let you walk into that board meeting as an observer, and I'm going to present the situation factually. And you're going to sit in that room and understand that what was built on your knowledge of this company's structure is being taken apart piece by piece. Kraus said nothing. I want you to know that I know, Ray said. Whatever the legal process produces, and I expect it will produce something eventually. I want you to know that I am not a man who doesn't see what's in front of him. I saw it. It's written down. And it goes where evidence goes. A long silence, then Kraus said quietly, You built a remarkable company, Ray. I know, Ray said. That's why I'm still here. He stepped back, gestured toward the boardroom door. Kraus walked in. Ray followed. The meeting took 40 minutes. The tabling of the audit report was presented matter-of-factly. No drama. The independent audit engagement was announced. The interim regional management structure was outlined. Frank would manage oversight directly until a new regional VP was hired through a process Ray intended to design personally. 2 board members asked questions. Both were answered fully. Kraus sat along the wall, observer row. He did not speak. He listened to the description of the investigation's scope with the face of a man watching a clock run down. When the meeting adjourned, he was among the first to leave. Ray did not watch him go. He was already in a conversation with the board chair about timeline. There were things that would take months. The full audit, the legal process that Patricia had already set in motion with Employment Counsel, the investigation of the Delaware entities, which would require forensic accounting and potentially regulatory referrals. Beverly's case and the cases of the others, those would be resolved faster, through direct settlement. And then, there was the work of rebuilding the culture of a building. That was the longest work. Ray knew that. He'd built organizations from scratch, which was hard. Rebuilding a culture that had been deliberately corrupted was harder, because you were working against the memory of what it had been, against the distrust that had been earned, against the habit systems, and the wariness, and the defensive postures that people develop when institutions fail them. It would take time. The right management, consistent action over months. He was going to give it all of that. After the meeting, he rode down to the lobby in the elevator alone, stood in it for a moment as the floors descended. Watching the numbers, the elevator opened. The lobby was doing what lobbies do at mid-afternoon. A family checking in. 2 businessmen waiting for a cab. A woman reading near the window. Trent at the bellman station. Actually, at the station, hands at his sides. Watching for guests who needed help, small things. Maybe meaningless, maybe the beginning of something different. You couldn't know yet. Ray crossed to the window, looked out at Michigan Avenue. The sky was still gray. The lake wind was still finding the gaps in jackets. October in Chicago doing exactly what it had always done. Nora Calvert came into the lobby from the staff corridor, near the elevator bank. She was in her uniform, back on shift, her choice. She'd told Owen she wanted to come back this afternoon. She crossed toward the housekeeping station, saw Ray standing at the window, and stopped. He turned. They looked at each other across the lobby. He nodded. She nodded back. She went to the housekeeping station, picked up her assignment board, went to the elevator, went back to work. Ray stood at the window for another minute. Thought about his father. Not for the first time today, but in a different way than before. Walter Callahan had died in 2001. He hadn't seen the Sterling Pinnacle finished. Ray had stood at the opening in 2004 and wished his father could see it. The scale of it, the chandelier, the way the lobby worked when it was full of people. He'd thought, at the opening, that his father would have been impressed. But standing here now at this window, having done what he'd done in the last 32 hours, he thought his father would have said something simpler. Something that didn't have anything to do with the chandelier or the scale, or any of it. Walter Callahan would have said, "You saw something wrong, and you fixed it. Good, that was it. That was the whole thing, in the language of a man who fixed engines in a garage in Tulsa and didn't waste words." Ray pulled out his phone, texted Linda. I need someone to pick up the Harley from the Marriott garage and bring it to the Pinnacle Motor Court. He put the phone back, looked around the lobby one more time. The chandelier caught the afternoon light at the angle it always caught it. The Carrara marble floor reflected the shapes of people moving across it. The orchids on the reception desk were white today. Someone had chosen white. He went back upstairs, spent 2 more hours with Patricia and Frank, working through the immediate action list. Signed what needed to be signed. Approved the communications plan for staff. Reviewed the outreach list for former employees. 16 names. Beverly was first on the list. She was already called. At 5:15, he took the elevator down for the last time that day. Walked through the lobby. The evening front desk shift had come on. A young woman Ray hadn't met yet. Adrienne, her tag said. Neat handwriting, the tag worn straight, looked up when he approached. Not with the calibrated indifference of Saturday morning. Just a person at a desk, present, paying attention. Good evening, Ray said. How's the shift been? She blinked, not used to the owner asking. Quiet so far. The 4 o'clock check-ins went smoothly. Good. Ray paused. What did they tell you in orientation about how to treat guests? She looked at him carefully. Equal service. Best possible for everyone who walks through the door. That's right, Ray said. That's the job. All of it. He nodded. Turned. He walked out through the revolving door. The doorman, whose name Ray had now learned, was Harold, 23 years old, 6 months on the job, held the door and said, Good evening, sir. Clear and genuine. Ray paused, looked at Harold. Good evening, Harold. Harold blinked. Nobody in management had ever used his name. Good evening, he said again. Warmer, this time. Ray walked out to the motor court. The Harley was there. Linda had managed it, as she managed everything. It sat at the edge of the motor court, where the light from the building's exterior caught the chrome. He stood beside it for a moment. Not long. Chicago was doing the thing it did in the early evening in October. The light going horizontal, coming in low and warm despite the gray sky, finding the metal and the glass and the water it could reach. The Sterling Pinnacle caught some of that light. Floor by floor, window by window, the building was beginning to glow in the dusk. Not the sharp blaze of noon, but something quieter, something that had to be earned by staying until the end of the day. Ray had stood in this spot in 2003, when there was nothing here but a foundation form and a construction fence. He'd stood here with a cup of coffee and a set of blueprints and the knowledge that what he was about to build would outlast him. Buildings do that. If you build them right, they outlast you, but they don't run themselves. They don't stay what you intended them to be without someone staying close enough to the floor to know when something's going wrong. Without someone being willing to walk back in through their own door as a stranger and see what they've actually built. He'd learned that the hard way. He wasn't going to learn it again. He put on the helmet, swung his leg over. The Harley's engine turned over with the deep, even sound of a machine properly maintained. He sat for a moment. Thought about Nora Calvert going back to her floors. Thought about Beverly Oaks in her kitchen, standing for 20 minutes, deciding whether to send an email. He thought about what it had cost her to reach for a system that was supposed to work, and what it had meant when it didn't. Thought about Spence, standing in the dining room on Saturday morning, following the groove someone had worn into his behavior, serving the wrong thing, knowing it was wrong and doing it anyway, because the environment had made it the path of least resistance. He thought about all of it. And then he thought about what it meant to actually build something. Not the concrete, not the steel, not the chandelier he'd spent 3 weeks sourcing, not the Carrara marble he'd argued for because it would last 100 years, the thing underneath all of that. The reasons you built it in the first place. The standard you held the building to when nobody was watching. His father had held that standard in a garage in Tulsa. Every car that came through the door, every customer who trusted him with it. The problem is the problem. The fix is the fix. Fair price. His word that the work was good. Ray had built 47 floors on that foundation. He was going to make sure they stayed on it. He rode out of the motor court, turned onto Michigan Avenue. The city opened up around him. The buildings, the light, the traffic, the particular irreducible noise and movement of a city that had been going since before you arrived and would keep going after you were gone. The Harley found its speed. The engine settled into its rhythm. Ray rode north. Behind him, the Sterling Pinnacle stood in the early evening light. 47 floors. The Venetian chandelier visible through the lobby glass, throwing its fractured light across the marble floor. A building he'd built. Building that was going to be, from here on, what he'd built it to be. He rode, voice over. People ask what the hardest part of building something is. They expect you to say the financing, the risk, the years of getting it wrong. But the honest answer is simpler and harder than any of that. The hardest part is staying honest about what you've actually built. Not what you intended, not what it looked like on the opening day. What it actually is on an ordinary Tuesday when nobody important is watching. Most people avoid that question. It's uncomfortable. It requires admitting the distance between intention and reality. But that distance, if you're willing to measure it honestly, is the only thing that tells you what needs to be fixed. And fixing what needs to be fixed, that's the whole job. Everything else is just the building.